The views discussed in this conversation are the views of individuals and not of Arrington Capital. This podcast is provided solely for informational purposes and is not financial, legal, tax, or investment advice. The participants of this podcast are not recommending any particular security, protocol, token, financial instrument, or other tradable asset or any investment strategy. It is not offering to sell or soliciting to buy any security or asset.
Welcome to the Pirate Pod from Arrington Capital, where we take the opportunity to chat with founders in our portfolio that are doing all kinds of new stuff in Web3. Today, we are super excited to have Foobar and Munam, the founders of Delegate, recently launched Clusters product out of that group. And they're going to talk a little bit about what they're doing. They've had some great news, some solid traction, a lot of attention into what they're doing from a cross-chain perspective, from a simplification perspective, and also talking about what they see in the future. But before we dive into delegating clusters, I always like taking a moment to step back and look at backgrounds and how we got into this space. So Munam, why don't we start with you? And why don't you give a little bit about yourself? How did you get into crypto? Why are you passionate about this? And what led you on the path to being part of the Delegate team?
Sure. Thank you so much. So I'm a first generation immigrant to the United States. The idea of entrepreneurship and I guess like cutting edge tech was always something that was interesting to me, both intellectually and as a business thing to pursue. I discovered crypto specifically in 2010 as just a nerdy kid in high school, found it somewhere on the internet and became interested in it just as something to trade before I knew of its utility. After I finished college, I actually started my career as a biomedical researcher. I was at Stanford Med for a couple of years before I made the switch from being a computational researcher into wanting to work in a different industry. And to me, I always like to be at cutting edge, fast moving things. So it was either AI or crypto, and crypto is just a lot more fun and I think fit in a little bit more with my anarchistic tendencies, let's say. And I just like the ability to affect greater change, I think, on shorter timelines. So worked in a couple places around crypto, worked at a couple of funds. I, was a core team member of Constitution DAO, worked on some fun creative projects as well, worked on crypto indices, and, came to Delegate by way of sliding into Foobar's DMs, I believe 6 hours before the smart contract went live, because I had heard rumors of it, had never spoken to him before, and, just presented to him a vision, because to me, when I heard of Delegate, it just clicked in my head. This was something that everybody could use, and the rest is kind of history. So it's been a really fun, 16 and a half months.
What was the most compelling part of that initial vision or idea around Delegate for you back then?
I have always been interested in ideas that I think are invisible. And what I mean by invisible is something that can sit in the background of other people's experiences without them even knowing. I think that's obviously a great place to be when you have fundamental level infrastructure that's unopinionated and can just improve your life without you ever knowing that you need it. And that's the biggest problem in crypto, is horrible UI UX. So the idea of invisible security that keeps everyone safe and improves our quality of life was compelling. A lot of things require someone to do a complex setup or buy into some standard. And what I liked about Delegate is I think we're very pragmatic. We just think, where are people today? Where are they going tomorrow? Let's just make sure we cover all the bases so that we don't enforce upon someone the need to do something out of the ordinary.
Awesome. Thanks, Munam. Foobar, you've built up quite a big following in the crypto space over the past several years. Give us a little bit about your backstory, how you got into the space, your initial idea around Delegate, and sort of what led you to this journey.
Totally. I'm a nerd at heart. So started out studying math, went into the machine learning world before it was cool. And actually it was the open source vision and ethos that pulled me in. I saw in the world of AI and ML, I saw all these scrappy startups dominating big enterprise competition, not through better manpower, better financials, but by simply opening up their ecosystems to the entire world and having dozens, hundreds of independent contributors build this up over time. That became an overwhelming compounding force. And so when it came to finance and money, fascinated by asset classes, stock market generally, And the idea of what if open source money existed kept popping up in my mind. Like, wow, that'd be a powerful idea. And then a few years later, I finally clicked, wait, Bitcoin exists. I even own some. I never quite made this connection. Um, and that pulled me in. So I feel like I almost skipped the digital gold phase of things and went straight to smart contracts are the coolest thing the world's ever invented. So I remember the day I was able to make my first $20 on the internet permissionlessly just by building a simple little tool that helped people out. That was a gigantic unlock, and so that pulled me further and further into DeFi, the NFTs, able to build a lot of powerful things there. But I realized that there was this big gap in experience. You had kind of the technical wizards who were smart enough to figure everything out, but it was a full-time job just keeping track of all their money. And then you had the new entrants who were interested in trying something new and often got fished and scammed, and that was the end of it. And I think that's led to a lot of the poor reputation in cryptos accrued over the years. So core thesis of mine is that open source money, open source programs are going to win. But for that to happen, it has to be simple and safe and secure enough for your aunt, your dad to be able to use. So that's what Delegate sprung out of.
Thanks, Foobar. What was that you made your first $20 in crypto on?
It was the silliest NFT helper thing ever. This project called Mooncats had been rediscovered, but nothing really worked right. It was this abandoned project from years ago, and it had been abandoned for a good reason. But a lot of people were trying to interact with it and do things, and I was just able to essentially write a for loop in a smart contract, and that itself was useful enough that it saved people minutes out of their day.
All right, so moving on to Delegate. So I want to step back and just do a little current landscape setting. You both are obviously focused on some of the simplification uses. A couple of issues that you're addressing through Delegate and clusters, which is a recently announced product from you. I want to get into sort of the difference between those two, but securing on-chain identities and assets paramount. And then the second part is sort of that people have and will continue to have multiple wallets for various purposes across any number of different blockchains. I know I'm in that boat, and I know many other people are. And many of those blockchains that you're a part of don't communicate or connect to each other. So when you think about the simplification problem, if we can just peel back a couple more layers and talk about why this is the problem you set out to solve, and do you think like there's a path where a lot of people in crypto got over the hurdle of the clunkiness and understood the benefit on the other side? Wallets are becoming easier and smarter and the UI is becoming better. Can you talk a little bit about that cross-chain simplification and how that works?
So I am and have been a power user of quite a wide range of apps. And so this sprung out of solving my own pain points. I was like, I'm reasonably technical, reasonably competent, have a good setup here, and I'm still wasting hours of my day trying to ensure I'm interacting from the right wallet, trying to remember what's linked to what. And across all these use cases, across DeFi, across NFTs, across gaming, everybody was going in their own strange ways, and the world was getting more and more fragmented. So I thought, what would the ideal setup be for me? The ideal setup would be that I've got all these wallets, cold, hot, multi-sigs, embedded wallets, but I just have my daily driver. I can click something from my phone. I can do what I need to do, and I'm not constantly at risk of being drained for my life savings. So that was the core motivating factor for me, was this ecosystem UX is untenable. What do I wish existed for myself? And then we've been able to expand that, I think, to both simpler and more complex use cases, but it starts with solving a problem at its very core.
And Foobar, is there anybody else working on this from your perspective? What has worked? What has been put in place? I know there's been broad attempts at UX. I know that's one been in the focus for a couple of years on many crypto applications and different L1s and L2s that are trying to help their ecosystem solve for this, to make it easy for people to come in and be a part of it and participate in more regularly in a more safe manner. Who else is out there sort of working on this, and why don't those things that are in existence today work?
Yeah, there were a couple people and teams who took a swing at the problem. It's a very widely recognized and salient problem. And you had a couple different approaches, like a project named Warm XYZ that's now been is defunct / acquired. You had EIPs about text records on ENS names. You had other approaches that tackled simple delegation, but with no granularity or programmability whatsoever. I think that the common theme of why these never worked is twofold. On the first, people are very good at building things that solve their specific problem, but they have a hard time with generalized architectures. For example, someone's making an NFT project and they say, I'm going to make an NFT delegation standard. But they don't stop to consider that there are fungible tokens out there, that people might want to do entire wallet level things, that you need granular rights splitting within that. So we were the first ones to come at it with an actual generalized architecture. And then the second bit is that B2B is a grind. You need, just putting good tech into the world isn't sufficient. You need adoption. And adoption breeds adoption. People, the median protocol runner is not technical or doesn't have a ton of time, even if they are technical, to dive into something. And so social proof is the best way to build that momentum. So a lot of people built these standards for themselves and never bothered to get any adoption from anyone else. And then it died in the water because if nobody adopts your standard, it's not much of a standard. So combination of good tech architecture and just extremely persistent.
Are you setting your own standards?
Yeah, so we developed this from scratch. I mean, there was a community working group who was interested in.
Well, do you think that others will adopt these? How do you think it extends from what you've built?
Totally. I think we've seen amazing willingness from other projects to adopt this. There have been over 150 integrations to date. And the reason for that is it's not their core competency. They want it to exist, but there's not a ton of benefit from building something that's marginally better. There's benefit from the entire ecosystem coalescing around the single approach, because for the end user, what matters is delegate once, reuse it a dozen times, 100 times across many apps. If every app has their own standard, then it's a bad user experience, and the apps also probably built it in a bad way because it's not their full focus. So I'm a big fan of the slim protocol thesis. Do few things and do them best in the world.
And then before, I want to talk to Munam a little bit about the traction and growth of sort of the whole ecosystem and adoption. But before we do, Foobar, can you give us, like, there's Delegate, and that is some of the security measures. And then there's clusters, which is one address for all of your wallets across all of these chains. Can you talk a little bit about the two at a high level and the difference between the two?
Totally. Our core mission is creating universal apps that work across all chains, that work for all your wallets, that work across all the other things you're trying to do in a single unified experience. So Delegate is institutional grade secure access control. Clusters is the consumer friendly version of that lets you tap into these institutional grade security measures, but also makes it compelling to just root your wallets, share it with friends, have a universal profile, get on the gaming leaderboard. So I'd put these as two sides of the same coin. both are building universal apps to fix fragmentation.
And then where's the trust with, so I'm trusting into Delegate that those are safe and secure, and that someone that's sending something to Kelly.xyz is going to get to the right wallet or address that they're looking for?
Somewhat, yeah. The Delegate contracts are immutable, highly audited, securing over $1 billion worth of assets at the moment. So those essentially cannot be rugged. And then within clusters, it's a naming convention. I would say the same way you see different names or wallet labels on a tool like Etherscan or in a tool like MetaMask. It's a way to, instead of every app having their own little configuration for what you're calling what wallet, a global standard everybody can coalesce around. Users set it once, use it everywhere. Apps have rich user data to tap into instead of having to recreate it every time. So yeah, at its core, it's a universal name.
Okay, got it. And then Munam, to turn it over to you, who will be using this? More devs, more crypto natives, more new entrants? If you think about, there obviously is some build and some, I'm sure you've got a plan for sort of how you're going to market, but who are you working with mostly now with these conversations and getting Delegate and clusters more adoption? And then where do you see it going?
So for clusters, I think we've also built it with that similar ethos in mind of it's generalizable for lots of different use cases. And I can give you one or two examples. If we look on the consumer side, there are a lot of people who perhaps, have assets sitting in one wallet, but want to use a different one for interaction purposes. Like if you have an NFT, for example, and you're keeping it within your ledger or your multi-sig or whatever security solution you prefer to use, and you don't want to interact with some project that requires having that asset, you can, use a different wallet that you've added to your cluster. And theoretically, the projects can accept that, okay, if this asset is sitting in your cluster, then they will let you use any wallet within that cluster. This is a little bit conceptually similar to that Delegate idea of if you could, sign for another wallet, people should accept that, you do in fact own those assets. And that's like a very lightweight consumer use case that I'm sure, everyone has experienced before. Like, this is sitting in some different wallet. I got to do something right now. I don't have it on me right now. The enterprise use case, to be honest, is not much different. It's just geared for like more business conventions. A lot of applications have permissioned addresses. So like what wallets are able to deposit, what addresses are able to deposit. I'll give you a very common example. A lot of DeFi applications have permission pools. If you're interacting with anybody from the real world, let's say like Wall Street, for example, you need these permission pools where everyone is KYC'd within them and all of these counterparties' identities. Well, for practical purposes, a lot of these firms have rules where they rotate their addresses for security reasons, once a week, once every 2 weeks, once a month. That becomes a real, pain for everyone because now you need good communication so that some intern at some fund can somehow, Twitter DM some DeFi application and say, hey guys, here's our new addresses. Please update all of these things. That's really, really painful. In a similar vein, if one address behind a cluster has, gone through this painful KYC process once, and another address gets added to it, that cluster, well, the application can allow the other address to be treated as if it has gone through that same security schema, just because, it is part of this cluster that someone controls and has, total discretion over what is added and what is not added to it. Ultimately, clusters is about making people's lives easier and grouping things together. We've talked to NFT projects that are cool. A lot of people like to trade with one and game with another and keep their, favorite NFT in another. This is a great way to consolidate profiles. And we've chatted with even, ETF providers who are saying, oh, clusters could be a really cool way for us to show our proof of reserves to the world instead of publishing a list of 5,000 addresses where we've hidden all of this, crypto around it.
Got it. Makes sense. And you've got 150, upwards of 200 projects now that have integrated into Delegate. Do you categorize them all? Like, what are sort of the core buckets of how you view them, whether it's NFTs or gaming or spending in one and holding the other one cold? How do you kind of categorize those projects?
I think you hit the nail on the head. So the current stats on Delegate, I just refreshed our website. It says we are securing, over $1 billion worth of assets for 183,000 wallets. And this is on about, I believe, 19 plus chains and counting. And what we did from like just a practical perspective when Delegate first came out was we started with NFT projects just because they tend to be the easiest projects to work with and they tend to be the most willing to try new and cool novel experiences. But we were incredibly intentional from day one, saying that we didn't want to get shoehorned as only an NFT tool. So we made sure after we got 2 or 3 really premier projects, and that's always been our goal and standard, is to find the best people to work with and work with them. Because if you can convince them, I think everyone downstream always is less reticent to adopt these standards. But we started with NFTs and we started with airdrops, and we were fortunate enough to work with some amazing teams day one, like Art Blocks and Forgotten Runes, etc. from day one. One of the next categories that we were really interested in was gaming, and we got to work with Yuga as one of our first projects there. Similarly, we knew that this was a really good fit for marketplaces. So we had, pretty quick integrations with OpenSea and Manifold, and then, so on and so forth, whether that's like asset attestation like Collabland, which has, 9 million wallets connected to it, or something that's like ticketing for the real world, like token proof. We looked at all of these different use cases and thought to ourselves, like, who are the really good teams over here? How can we help them like construct a really good narrative around, security being sexy, as cliche as that sounds, and help execute really well with them. And once we did that, I think people tend to take notice of like, okay, who are the people at the top of each of these verticals? What are they doing? And it makes it much easier to work with other people. So we were very intentional in saying like, we want to prove out from day one that this can kind of work for anything.
Are you working directly with the layer ones? Because you're working across a bunch of different chains. How do the individual chains or the layer ones think about this? Are you working with them directly? What do they think about something like this? Because it opens the aperture for them, but it's also not specific to their ecosystem.
Absolutely. So with layer ones, we just permissionlessly deploy on each new chain. And oftentimes when we deploy onto a new chain, it's because either the chain itself or a project from the chain reaches out to us and say, hey, we love your tooling. We are sitting over here. Would you, mind deploying over here so we can use your tech? And with chains, we try to do as much co-marketing as we can just because it benefits everybody over there. But I think we go off of needs. And that's how we've always grown. Like we've always come out to, I guess, less commonly used chains because someone will say, hey, I'm a developer here, I'm a project over here, and like my community would really love this tool and I want to keep them safe. Can you work with us on getting it over there? That's our style.
And then you're building this on Layer 0 V2, which has recently come out. I think Foobar, you've been the closest to that. Can you tell us a little bit more about this? I know you're passionate about some of the ecosystems you've been a part of. You've shared a lot of that on social. Can you talk to us about Layer 0 and what's behind like the choice and thinking there?
The bridge world, especially in crypto, has been an interesting one. I have what I call the bridge trilemma, which is not actually a trilemma, but just means that there are no more than 3 bridges that haven't been hacked at any one time in the world. and we've seen some pretty shoddy designs, which have pushed a lot of people away from building for a multi-chain cross-chain world. But especially in our work with Delegate, it's become abundantly clear that users cannot manage all this themselves. There are too many. You need universal experiences where no matter which chain, which wallet, which environment they're on, it's a familiar flow for the end user. That's the only way these things take off. And so as I was looking around at the landscape of bridges and whatnot. I was especially impressed with Layer Zero's track record. $15 million security bounty, yet unclaimed. Very, very careful approach towards immutable contracts. They've built out a modular system where you can either use existing validator sets, or you can even plug in your own validator sets, or mix and match and combine the two. So you could take, for example, a Layer 0 validator plus a Google Cloud validator plus one run by your own project team plus a community one, and do whatever modular security level you need. So that's especially attractive when we're experimenting with new primitives, but then need to lock those in and get nation state levels of resilience and decentralization. So I've been quite impressed with both their breadth of ecosystem, but also there are some very nice features like being able to route native value across chains that have let us level up clusters.
That's great. Thanks, Foobar. And then can we talk a little bit about bridging? What role does clusters have in the bridging world? Does it replace it to some extent? For newer entrants to crypto, you're kind of addressing some of the simplification. How do those people think about clusters and bridging and the difference between them, right? As more and more of this becomes obfuscated and easier, how do you think about that?
To set the stage a bit, I'd say for a while we had L1 blockchains as the only game in town. If you had Bitcoin, it was on the Bitcoin blockchain. If you were writing a smart contract, it was on the Ethereum blockchain, and that was that. The two didn't really communicate. Now we're in this world where you've got a lot of innovation on the execution environment side. You've got fast and cheap blockchains like Solana, like Say. You've got a really interesting interconnected world like Cosmos. And so it doesn't make sense for apps to silo themselves into chain maximalism. Ethereum's great for some things. Solana's amazing for other things. And you need to tap into both of these. You need to tap into both of these worlds. So Clusters is not trying to compete or become another bridge. We're trying to provide the best app level experience on top of the bridges. So in a sentence, what we do is you can take any action on any chain, and the relevant data from that action gets routed to the other blockchains. So say, simplest example, I want to register a cluster name. I want to get Foobar / or Kelly / I can do that on Ethereum. I can do it on Polygon. I can do it on Solana. I can do it on Avalanche. I can do it on Bitcoin, even in the near future. And so it doesn't matter which wallet I'm using. It doesn't matter what blockchain I'm on. It doesn't matter where my money is. These all get routed into the same universal state. So that idea of chain abstraction, I think, is powerful in two ways. It's powerful because it improves UX, but it's also powerful because it taps into a market that's 5x, 10x the size. You don't have to pick a camp in this silly little faction game. You can truly work with everyone, and I love that.
Thanks, Foobar. And this is all through Layer 0, and this is all through audited smart contracts on Delegate and clusters. Can you take us just one step deeper on technically how that process is done in the smart contract?
Totally. So we are in our beta phase right now on the cluster side of things, which means that what we've got running today is this auction period for distributing names. I think it's really critical that everyone gets their own name, and they're using it. They're running it on social media. They're configuring all their wallets underneath it.
Is the auction is it a pay to buy your domain?
Yep, that's right.
Okay.
So I think it's a bit of a it's a bit of a lesser used idea in the crypto world, but I firmly believe that apps should be useful and should solve real problems. And so that's our goal here with this beta period is how do you get wide distribution? How do you get as many people using this as possible to be able to nail those name use cases on day one of prod launch? So what that architecture looks like today in a simple flow, you're trying to bid on a name. You can go to one of 8 chains, EVM or Solana, that you submit the data, that then gets registered, and it also gets routed with a cross-chain message into a global hub that does ordering, finality, contention resolution, and so on. So our beta period of what we've got is transaction initiation from anywhere, which is step 1 of chain abstraction. And then the second bit is how do you solve state replication, where once that ordering has happened, you then propagate data outwards again.
Moving on to some of the beta net and what comes next. What is next for you? When does clusters go mainnet? What do you think the next big milestone that you all reach is? I know you've had a ton of traction with the number of projects, with the billions of dollars that have been secured on chain. Munam, what's the next big milestone that we'll be talking about in 6 to 12 months?
Well, I think it's actually the further propagation of these tools. From day one, when it came to Delegate, I told Foobar that, the game actually starts once we hit $1 billion, because I think that's a really big psychological unlock. That's when people really start to pay attention. That's when serious enterprises think, okay, these guys are securing $1 billion. This is not a little joke. There's something of real value over here. So that's one push over there. On the cluster side, clusters growth has been going great. We are at over 40,000 names have already been registered. So those are all positive signs. I think the magic here is that these tools really end up playing off of each other really, really well. From a practical perspective, Delegate as a company, we're obsessed with the idea of network effects. How do we create a brilliant experience for someone such that wherever else they go, they say, I want that same experience. And we also like to build tools that interplay off of each other. If you've got good network effects and you are solving real problems, then, those problems have many applications, or rather those solutions have many applications. In this case, with clusters, you can add things to your wallet, and you could use Delegate to basically give yourself the security layer between your different wallets. That's what I see as a future, is honest to God, the adoption here. If you're asking about where we go product wise, I think, governance is one of the areas that we've thought about a lot. Just, offhand, it's something we've chatted about a lot because we want to bring people more on chain and more secure and more convenient. And that's a good place. We've thought about even maybe perhaps funkier use cases like ticketing, etc. We've thought about marketplace products, but ultimately it's just quality execution. If the last sort of 15, 16 months were all about Delegate, I would say that, now it's about clusters and Delegate. And once we're convinced that we have, beautiful experience here, then it's time to grow these use cases into other domains.
Awesome. All right. And if you were to sort of think even bigger and broader and wider, there's a lot of conversation now about decentralized social and the social sphere, and I can see a world where your wallet, your domain has a play there. How do you think Delegate or the integration of the new stuff that comes out, whether that's Workcast or other, if you were just throw it out there, right, this is total future, what do you think that looks like? And I want you both to take a minute to answer.
Social applications need to bootstrap themselves. Lots of people are now, equipped with the tools to build out cool, decentralized social experiences, but it's really hard to get users. Anybody with a business can attest to that. The beautiful thing about Delegate is, since there are network effects baked into this, you are able to offer people the ability to onboard onto your platform with really low risk and low, complexity threshold. That is a superpower unlock. And I can give you 2 examples. our very first project that we ever integrated for Delegate, the day one project that we had basically kind of launched with, was Forgotten Runes. Forgotten Runes is like a very premier NFT product or project, and they had this thing that they called their Halloween goodie bag airdrop, if I'm recalling correctly. And it basically said if you owned one of a dozen other NFTs, and this was right around Halloween, I think this was in October, they said you could get like a goodie bag free token from their community. Now, this is like a great strategy of targeting other premium high quality communities and saying like, we want to bring those community members into our fold. The problem is like, if you're saying to someone with, a crypto punk, and maybe they have that alien punk that's worth like $10 million or whatever, they are not going to participate to get your, $50, $500, or however many dollar, free thing it is, just because there's too much, like technical risk involved. Delegate was a complete safe way to bring people into the fold. The same thing applies for like social networks. You're able to say, okay, like there are all these great communities that are using Delegate. We want to grow into these communities. We want them to adopt our platform for XYZ reasons. Here, use Delegate and hop onto it easily.
Foobar, where do you see Delegate and clusters in the future? What is their role in a future where everyone's on Warcast or everyone's using these different new social platforms or new decentralized application for peer-to-peer business? What does that look like for Delegate and clusters?
Clusters becomes your universal profile.
Mm-hmm.
So all the chains, all your wallets, tons of fascinating off-chain metadata, whether that's a Coinbase attestation or a world coin proof or NFT community membership. This can all be lumped in on top of your cluster. And there's so much richness that you can populate, but it's only the most useful when everybody is using it. So there's been a ton of interest in NFT communities for how do you use this universal profile for airdrop targeting. You've got, for example, a Pudgy Penguin on Ethereum, and you want to airdrop a Solana coin to their wallets. Now you can do it without having to gather any malleable information.
As long as they have a clusters domain, right?
Yeah, exactly. So they configure it once in their clusters. Okay. There are transaction fees, basic gas. We're doing a lot of work now to make those as low as possible because this stuff needs to scale to millions of users and beyond. The one contentious economic thing is names, cluster names. If a bunch of people want the DeFi / cluster name, then that's going to be more expensive. But something like Kelly remains not zero, but very cheap for 99% of users.
Thank you very much for being a part of this. Where can people go to find out more, whether that's the auction that's currently going on or learning about Delegate, learning about clusters?
So we've got two websites, delegate.xyz and clusters.xyz. All our socials are linked on there. We've got detailed documentation, lots of great user stories and app integration stories. If you're interested in working together, it's fully self-serve, but we also do a lot of work to help deliver a premium experience for people who want it. So feel free to reach out via Twitter DMs, Telegram DMs, what it may be. And thanks for listening.
Perfect. Thank you, Foobar. Thank you, Munam. Congrats on all the success so far, and thanks for coming on the Pirate Pod.